Good morning, Edgewood. So last week we started a new series kind of going through the book of Habakkuk, and I need to kind of start by acknowledging the elephant in the room that I did not talk about last week, and that is, how do we actually even say this name? All right, is it Habakkuk? Is it Habakkuk? All right, you might have been raised one way or the other. If I'm being honest, it's probably neither of those. It's probably some guttural pronunciation that I'm not even going to try to attempt right now. So you might hear me say Habakkuk or Habakkuk. We're talking about the same person. And so please bear with me as we mispronounce these biblical names. We all do it, and so I need your grace with that. But we're in this book, and I'm excited about this study. Hopefully when I introduced it to you last week, you might have been a little surprised because you were like, I didn't even know that you could preach through the book of Habakkuk. But you're also a little excited as we get to explore and walk through a book that we potentially are not as familiar with, but also a book that I think has a message that all of us need to hear at times. And that's, we really can trust God even when there's a lot of uncertainty in the world, even when we go through hard times, even when we face oppression and we face injustice and we face these things that I feel like, if you're like me, we experience, or at least we see other people experiencing on a daily basis. And so we are going to be in chapter 1, verse 5 through 11 today. And just to set a little groundwork, in case you either forgot or you weren't here last week, Habakkuk is this prophet who is in the southern kingdom of Judah, and he's kind of prophesying. He's on the scene in the final decades before Judah gets conquered by Babylon and taken into exile. And as we kind of narrow in on Habakkuk's day and time, things really aren't going well for these people. Habakkuk looks out at the people. He looks out specifically at Jerusalem. And the people, the city, are characterized by oppression. They're characterized by violence. They're characterized by lawlessness, by injustice, and immorality is just all around them. And things just aren't going well. And so Habakkuk kind of is looking around, and he's like, God, are you going to do something about this? Like, God, you're God, you're sovereign, you're in control. You are supposed to kind of be helping to kind of manage things around here, and you're kind of just letting your people go wild. Like, are you going to do something? Are you going to stop the injustice? Are you going to stop the oppression? Are you going to stop the violence? Are you even aware? Do you care about what's going on? Do you plan to do anything about it? Are you even listening? And so last week we kind of saw Habakkuk's kind of first cry out to God. God, why are you letting this happen? Why are you letting all of these things go on? Why are you not doing anything? Habakkuk is weighed down by this burden of all the wickedness and the injustice that he sees around him. And hopefully we kind of share that same kind of burden. Hopefully when we look at Habakkuk and we look at what he sees, hopefully we share in his lament a little bit. Hopefully we share his heart for the brokenness around us. Hopefully we too are crying out to God to do something. God, look at our world. God, look at the people around us. God, look, even in my own life, I'm hurting. I'm broken. There's pain. There is suffering. There is injustice all around me. It's not just me, it's everybody. God, I believe that you can do something about this. I believe that you can intervene. I believe that you have the power to stop all of this. Why don't you? Why don't you do it? And so what follows in Habakkuk, it's this back and forth conversation between Habakkuk and God. And in our verses today, God is going to respond to Habakkuk's first complaint. Last week, Habakkuk cries out to God, God, do something. And now God's going to respond. And God's going to tell Habakkuk exactly what it is that he plans to do. And the problem for Habakkuk, which is oftentimes the problem for us when we cry out to God and when we ask God to do something, is his answer is not always what we want to hear. It's not always, yes, I'm going to fix things. I'm going to do things. Well, it is, I'm going to fix things. But he's not always going to do it the way that we think he should do it or that we would want it to happen. And so let's look. Habakkuk chapter 1, verse 5. This is God talking now to Habakkuk. Look at the nations and observe and be utterly astounded. For I am doing something in your days that you will not believe when you hear about it. And so God starts with these three imperatives. Look, observe, and then I really love this last one, be utterly astounded. All right, you've asked for me to do something, and now I'm responding to your concerns, I'm responding to your complaints, and you are not going to believe what I'm about to do. All right, and in fact, nobody's going to believe it because I'm going to do the unthinkable. I guarantee you, in all of your thinking and planning, and I'm sure you've come up with this plan of how to fix everything, and I can guarantee you that what I'm going to do was not anywhere on your radar as far as things that I could do. And so all I need you to do, all right, just sit back, look, observe, and then just be astounded as to what I'm going to do in response to your complaint. And this is the problem. Okay, again, we said this a little bit, but we often think that we know how God should respond. All right, we see the problems in front of us. We see the pain, we see the hurt, we see the violence, we see the oppression, whatever it is, right? We see the problem, and we come up with the plan. Now, the problem is we don't actually have the power to fix it, but we know how it should be fixed. And so again, we see the problem, we come up with the plan, and we bring the plan to God, and we say, all right, God, I've done all the hard work for you. All you have to do is just execute the plan. It doesn't work like that, all right? It does not work like that. We think we know what's best. We think we know how God should do things, and that's not how God works. And God is even going to assure Habakkuk here, whatever you think I need to do to fix the oppression and the injustice, everything that you've been crying out against, just go ahead and understand. I can guarantee you that my solution has never even crossed your mind, all right? And we need to make sure that we don't assume how God is going to deal with the events that happen around us. Because just when we think that we've figured out God's purpose, when we think that we know how God should act, we're going to very quickly learn that God's ways are higher than ours, and his plan is typically not, and usually not, our plan. And so what's the unthinkable that God's going to do? Verse 6, look, I am raising up the Chaldeans. Now the Chaldeans were better known as the empire that this people group would come to represent. That's the Babylonians. So God is saying, all right, Habakkuk, here's what I'm going to do. I am raising up the Babylonians, and they are going to fix the problem. All right, they are going to fix the ones. Just like God raised up the Assyrians to deal with the northern kingdom of Israel when they rebelled, when they were wicked, when they were characterized by violence and oppression and wickedness and injustice and immorality and all of these things. God raised up the Assyrians, and the Assyrians came in and they took out the northern kingdom of Israel. And now God is looking at Habakkuk and he's saying, all right, just like I did with the northern kingdom of Israel and the Assyrians, I'm going to do the same thing with you guys. All right, I've heard your cries, and so I'm going to raise up the Babylonians now, and I'm going to send them, and they're going to wipe you guys out, and there'll be no more injustice, right? If you guys aren't here anymore, right, if you're either dead or in exile, there's no more injustice, no more violence. Right? You can't oppress people if there's no people to oppress. So God's raising up the Babylonians as his instrument of divine justice, his instrument of divine judgment. And the Babylonians are going to come, and they're going to purge the land of its unfaithfulness. And again, nobody, including Habakkuk, I think saw this coming. Habakkuk did not even consider that this plan would be on the table. And so what God does from here is he goes on, he essentially describes the Babylonians. And he describes why they are going to be so good at doing what they are going to do. He goes on and he essentially describes this mighty Babylonian military machine that is going to be very effective in carrying out this work of judgment. All right, so this is what he says, continuing on in verse 6 there. Look, I'm raising up the Chaldeans, that bitter, impetuous nation that marches across the earth's open spaces to seize territories not its own. They are fierce and terrifying. And so again, these words, bitter and impetuous, they essentially are describing the policies and the practices of the empire. So bitter really could be better interpreted as the word fierce here. All right, it's kind of like a wild animal that's going to attack anything that comes in its way. And this is how the Babylonians are going to act. They are going to be bitter. They're going to be fierce. They're going to attack anything in front of them. And the word impetuous really communicates the speed and efficiency with which they do these things. They're going to march across the land, and they're going to attack other nations at will. You better not be in their way, because they're going to just plow right through you. And they can, because they have the power to do it. And this was the kind of general disposition that the Babylonians held, is they were hostile towards the nations around them. They wanted to expand, and they didn't care who you were and what you thought you were capable of doing. They were going to just go right through you. And they were going to take your land, and they were going to make it their land. And they've become, as they've campaigned and as they've fought against the Assyrians and the years in the past, the Babylonians have become this battle-hardened army. And they're capable of doing this, right? They are generally unconcerned with diplomacy, right? Don't even think about raising a white flag. They don't care. They're fierce. They're terrifying. They're coming to get you. They're coming to get you. Verse 7, their views of justice and sovereignty, they stem from themselves. So again, the Babylonians, they're a law unto themselves, which ironically sounds kind of like how Judah's become, right? We looked at this last week. The Judean sense of justice has become inverted, which was once what was considered right is now considered wrong, and what was considered wrong has now become right. And the Israelites in the southern kingdom of Judah have kind of become a law unto themselves, and God's telling them, hey, the Babylonians are exactly like you guys have become. They're a law unto themselves. They don't answer to anyone or to anything. They just do what they want to do, right? And they don't recognize territorial boundaries, right? If you think you've got a border, they don't care. Your laws do not apply to them. They just do what they want, right? And again, power's king. Power is king in Babylon. You got a king. Again, Babylon doesn't care about your king. They want your land. They're going to take your land. They don't care about your laws. They're just going to do what they want to do. Verse 8, their horses are swifter than leopards and more fierce than wolves of the night. Their horsemen charge ahead. Their horsemen come from distant lands. They fly like eagles, swooping to devour. So again, we just get now kind of these metaphors of animals to help describe what the Babylonian army is like. Their army is efficient. They're ferocious. Their cavalry is swifter than leopards and more ferocious than wolves, right? This devastating combination. And they just charge ahead, unwavering in their mission to attack and to conquer. And my favorite description is the one with the eagles, flying like eagles. All right? Now, I don't know how much you know about eagles, and I don't know exactly what eagle God had in mind. I like to think God is picturing a golden eagle. All right? Golden eagles, which are the fastest eagles. They can reach upwards of 200 miles an hour in their descents. That's what the Babylonians are. Again, you better not be a rabbit if a golden eagle sets his eyes on you, because you don't even have time to react, and they've snatched you up. And this is what the Babylonian army is like, swooping like eagles to devour you. They're going to be upon you in no time, and you can't do anything. You have no defense, no resistance, swifter like leopards, fiercer than wolves, swooping, devouring like eagles. That's what you have to expect. Verse 9, all of them come to do violence. Their faces are set in determination, and they gather prisoners like sand. Again, one objective if you're the Babylonians. One objective, violence. That's all you care about. How violent can I make this? All right, and I can kind of just picture these Babylonian soldiers just trying to outdo one another. Oh, you did this one violent act. I can do worse than you, or better than you, depending on how you want to characterize it. They sought to inflict the greatest harm possible on their enemies. And they were determined in doing that, which again, I find this ironic, because what is one of the things that Habakkuk has complained about when it comes to the people in Judah? Violence, right? There's violence all around us. And what is God saying that he's going to do? God's going to bring an even worse violence in order to take out Judah. And so again, you're complaining about violence. I'm going to use these people who are even more violent than you are to judge you. All right? And God is going to give Judah a taste of its own medicine as a means of discipline, correction, and judgment. And all of this is just going to come easy if you're Babylon. It comes easy. It takes prisoners, gathers prisoners like sand. Now, how easy is it to gather sand? So if you've ever been to the beach before, all right, and I were to ask you to get me a bucket of sand, do you think you would be able to do it? Yes, probably, right? Again, if you're a betting person and somebody were to bet you, hey, I bet you can't go to the beach and get a bucket of sand, you would take that bet, right? It's easy. Take a bucket, you scoop up a bucket of sand, here you go. And this is what God says it's like for the Babylonians, right? It's child's play. You think you stand a chance against them? They gather prisoners like gathering up a bucket of sand. It's easy. Even a child could do it. And I think it's fitting that he even uses this word, because if you think back to the covenant that God entered into with Abraham, God made Abraham two promises, two big promises, right? I'm going to give you land, and I'm going to give you descendants. And he used some metaphors to describe what Abraham's descendants were going to be like. There were two of them. One of them was, you're going to be as numerous as the stars in the sky. But then the other one is, you're going to be as numerous as the sand on the seashore. And what is God saying Babylon is now going to do? To this people who are described as sand on the seashore, what is Babylon going to do? Babylon's going to gather them up, and they're going to take them away. And again, it's going to be like child's play. It's going to be like child's play. It's nothing to them. They're barely even going to break a sweat. Verse 10, they mock kings, and rulers are a joke to them. They laugh at every fortress and build siege ramps to capture it. So again, you think your army's something special? Think again, all right? You think your king is somebody to be respected, and your king is this great leader and this great warrior? The Babylonians are going to laugh in your face. They don't care. They don't care how impressive you think you are. They don't care how many wars, how many campaigns your king has been on. They're going to be joking all night long. They eat kings like yours for breakfast. All right? Think your city's fortified? Think it can't be taken? Think again. And again, the Jerusalem thought they were almost impenetrable. Right? Jerusalem was often thought of as being one of the most fortified cities in the ancient world, and it just naturally made it very difficult to attack. So if you know anything about Jerusalem, the city sits on top of a hill, and then the hill is surrounded by these deep valleys on three different sides, on the east, the west, and the south. And so in order to get to Jerusalem, not only do you have to go up a hill, but then before you actually get to the city, you then have to go down into this valley and then back up again. And then from there, you're met with these fortified city walls, and you're essentially sitting ducks. Like it is very difficult. The only chance you have at taking the city of Jerusalem is by attacking on the north side, where there was no valley. But so then you essentially have to funnel your entire army into this one area, and it's just hard to attack. Very easy to defend, hard to attack. And what does God say? You think your city's fortified? Doesn't matter to the Babylonians, right? They laugh at every fortress. They're going to build siege ramps, and they're going to capture it, right? Even if it takes them months, even if it takes them years, it doesn't matter. They're undeterred, and they're going to, the entire time they're attacking you, they're just going to be laughing at you. Going to be laughing at you. Verse 11, they sweep by like the wind and pass through. They are guilty. Their strength is their God. And so again, these Babylonians, they're known to sweep through like these hurricane force winds, just leaving nothing but death and destruction in their wake. They're going to come through. They're going to attack. They're going to destroy everything and leave nothing but ruins. And part of the reason why they do this, right, again, God acknowledges their guilt in this. They are guilty. They are guilty because they don't worship and honor the one true God. But even still, God is going to use this nation, this wicked, rebellious, ungodly nation, who is guilty in their own right, to judge another. That's how God's going to use them. And so next week, we're going to look at Habakkuk's response. All right, this is all God says to Habakkuk. Habakkuk says, God, are you going to do something? And God says, yep, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to send the Babylonians. And again, put yourself in Habakkuk's shoes for just a moment. We're not looking at his response yet. Put yourself in his shoes. How do you think he's feeling right now? Probably a little scared. I mean, I'm trying to think, if it were me, my first response is, what? Are you kidding me? How is that better, right? What? And again, Habakkuk is trying to balance what he thinks God should do with what God is actually saying that he is going to do. And again, Habakkuk asked, God answered. It's not necessarily what Habakkuk wanted to hear. And so what I think we need to do is kind of think through a few different things that we really need to be aware of, especially when we bring questions to God. When we bring questions to God, when we bring complaints to God, there are some things that we need to be aware of, because if we go into these conversations with God thinking, okay, I'm going to ask God a question, I already know what he's going to say. I just need him to hear, I need to hear him say the words to me just for affirmation. We need to be prepared for God to not always respond how we think God's going to respond. And so a few quick takeaways. All right, number one, we need to be astounded by the works and the ways of God. We need to be astounded by the works and ways of God. And God tells Habakkuk as much, right? He says, be utterly astounded. Okay, because when we come to God with these questions, with these complaints, with these concerns, whatever they are, when we cry out to God, who are we coming to? We're not coming to a teacher. We're not coming to a boss. We're not coming to a friend. We're not coming to a spouse. We need to remember who we are bringing these complaints to, and we need to make sure that we don't reduce what we think God is going to do to the limits of our own understanding. God, I think you're going to do this. And God's like, be utterly astounded, okay? I am not going to act. I'm not going to respond how you think I'm going to respond, because that's who God is. We need to be prepared to be utterly astounded at what God can and likely will do in our lives, because it's not what you think he's going to do. Second thing, we need to be cautious of our own assumptions about the works and ways of God. And Habakkuk made this mistake. All right, he asked God to intervene. He made assumptions about what he thought God would do. And again, I don't know if he thought just like the Spirit of God was going to come into the city, and every single person who's living a wicked and rebellious life, every single person who's guilty of injustice, every single person who's guilty of immorality, I don't know if he thought God was just going to like flip this light switch and all of a sudden it's all going to be rainbows and butterflies in the city and everybody's going to be living like, that's not really how God acts. One of the things that we need to know that is true of God is God lets us choose. God gives us a choice. We can choose to worship and honor God, or we can choose to not worship and honor God. And every single time, God is going to honor our choices. And so if the people have decided to reject God, if the people have decided to rebel against God, God is going to give them over to their own devices, to the desires of their hearts. He is going to let them do that. He's not just going to come in and change the people. And I think Habakkuk had this assumption. And so again, we need to make sure, we need to be cautious of our own assumptions about the works and the ways of God. God's ways are not our ways. God's will is not our will, right? We're not always going to understand why God does things the way that he does them. They're not necessarily going to make sense to us. They're not going to add up. We're probably going to be left with the same question that we came to God with to begin with, which is, why, God? Why are you doing this way? But we need to make sure that we don't assume to think that things are going to make sense. All right? Again, who is God? God is an infinitely powerful and infinitely eternal God. And we're not anything close to that. And so why would you think that you're going to be able to understand why God does things the way that he does? Don't assume. All right? Don't assume. Be cautious of our own assumptions about the works and the ways of God. And then the last thing, again, we've got to still understand this, and this is one of the hardest truths when it comes to God, is we need to be aware, even in the midst of the uncertainty, even in the midst of the unknown, even in the midst of the questions, we need to be aware that God is both all-loving and all-powerful. Because this right here comes down to one of the biggest questions, one of the biggest objections that people have when it comes to God. It's this idea of how can God be who he is when there's evil and suffering in the world? Again, just look at the world. Look at the world around us. Is there evil and is there suffering in this world? Yes. Yes, there is. And so how can God be both loving, and all-powerful at the same time? Why does God allow all of this violence and injustice and oppression and all of this suffering? Why does he allow it? Because really, here's the kind of underlying assumptions behind these questions. We kind of tell ourselves, and again, I hear these objections all the time from people who are trying to essentially prove that God does not exist, or prove that God is not all-loving, or prove that God is not all-powerful. They look at the world, and again, the assumption is that if God is all-powerful, if he is all-powerful, then he can create any world that he wants to. He can create it. And what kind of world do we live in? A world with evil and suffering. And so why would God want to make a world, why would God want to create a world with evil and suffering? And if God had the power to create a world without evil and suffering, and he did not, then that's not a very loving God. Because if God had the power to create a world without evil and suffering, if God was actually all-loving, then he would prefer at the same time to create a world that did not have evil and suffering. Because why would a loving God create a world where there's evil and suffering? Is that a very loving God? No. And so again, this is the objection. Either God is all-loving or God is all-powerful, but he can't be both. He can't be both. But we need to recognize, even when we read passages like this where God talks about, hey, I'm going to allow this suffering. I'm going to allow this to take place. This has a purpose. I'm going to allow it. We need to be aware that God is both all-loving and all-powerful. He is. And here's how we can think about it, all right? Even when we don't see it and understand it, both of these things can still be true. All right, and we know for a fact, think about your own life, think about the world, we know for a fact that there are cases in which we permit suffering to bring about a greater good. Okay? We take our children to the doctor about once a year to get flu shots. Okay? It is not a pleasant experience. Now again, my children are, how old are they now? 8, 7, and 4 are the current ages. Do children that young enjoy getting shots? No. Is a shot a pleasant thing? No. All right, and so we take our kids to the doctor to get their flu shots every year, and it's like pulling teeth. All right? Why do I allow my children to go through that, though? Again, it does hurt. I'll admit that. Okay, again, shots are not pleasant. Why do I allow my daughter, my son, my daughters, my son, to go through that, to suffer by getting poked with the needle? It's for her good, because I know it is far better for you to experience this tiny, momentary affliction than for you to actually get the flu. And so I'm going to allow for you to suffer for the greater good. For the greater good. And again, why does God allow suffering in our life? We can't always necessarily pinpoint the exact reason, but we look at everything that God has done, and we know God is going to allow this because something good is going to come out of this. And God can be both all-powerful, he can be the God who created the universe, and he can be all-loving at the same time. And we see both of those things collide. I think the best picture of those two things colliding is at the cross of Jesus, where Jesus suffered. So did God allow suffering? Yes, right? Why? Why did Jesus suffer? Was it for his good? No. It's for our good. Right? Jesus suffered for our good. And just like God is going to do in Habakkuk's day, God, in Jesus' day, he allowed a wicked empire to be raised up, and he allowed that empire to bring judgment. But who did he bring the judgment down upon? Upon me? Upon you? Judgment was brought down upon Jesus. It was not brought down upon the ones who deserved it. The judgment was brought down upon Jesus. And Jesus demonstrated his love for us because even though we were sinners, even though we were the ones that deserved the judgment, Christ died for us. And he demonstrated his love by dying for us, but he demonstrated his power by rising from the grave. And so can God be both all-loving and all-powerful? Absolutely he can. Absolutely. And we're not always going to understand it. We're not always going to like it. But God is at work. Right? God's not always going to explain why he does the things that he does. And we can still come to God with these hard questions. We can come to God with these complaints. We can come to God with these concerns. But we need to make sure that we don't always think that we're going to get the answer that we want. It's not going to happen that way. Right? God's not always going to meet our questions with the answers that we want him to have. And we are going to suffer. God does not promise, hey, when you become a Christian, all the suffering goes away. Find me that verse in the Bible. Right? We are going to suffer. We're going to suffer mentally. We're going to suffer emotionally. We're going to suffer physically. And we don't always know why. We don't always know why. God doesn't always explain every single detail of suffering. You know what he does instead? He entered into suffering. He endures it with us. He doesn't try to explain why we go through it. He goes through it with us. He endured the suffering with us. And he tells us to remember, hey, a day is coming when there is going to be no more suffering. And guess how I think we'll respond on that day? I think we'll be utterly astounded. I think we'll be utterly astounded. God is doing something. He is. We don't always know what. We don't always know why. We don't always like it. But God is doing something. And he is good. And he is powerful. And he is worthy to trust. He is worthy to believe in. Because what's the alternative? Do you think life is better with God or without God? I think it's better with God. And I would rather believe in a God who endures suffering with me and walks through me with the suffering because he has some greater good that I can't understand and I can't comprehend than a God who's absent, than a God who doesn't care, than a God who doesn't answer. That's the God I want to worship. Will you worship him with me? Let's pray. God, we thank you for this day. These are hard verses. This is a hard passage. There's really not much hope in these verses. It's just, hey, Habakkuk, violence is coming. But we know that these verses were not the end of the story. The story doesn't even just end with this book. The story of your response to Habakkuk ultimately ended with Jesus at the cross. That is your response to Habakkuk's cry. That is your response to our cry when we ask you why. Why, God? Why is this happening? And you answer it, and you respond to it, and you point us to the cross, where Jesus took that suffering upon himself so ultimately we don't have to experience it. Because there is no greater suffering. As much as we might think we suffer, there is no greater suffering than being separated from an all-loving and all-powerful God forever. And because you did not want us to suffer in that way, you took the suffering upon yourself so that we would not have to. And we praise you for that. We praise you for that. And even as we cry out to you amidst our current circumstances, as we cry out to you amidst our current suffering, as we cry out to you amidst the injustice and the immorality that is all around us, God, we know that you have displayed your love and your power for us through Jesus. And so we can look to you and we can trust in you. That even amidst the brokenness, even amidst everything that we go through, you are all loving, you are all powerful, you are sovereign, you are in control, you desire for us good things, And one day you will make all things new, and nothing is going to be better than that. And so whatever we go through in this world, all of the suffering, all of the pain, this brief momentary affliction is going to be nothing when we come into glory and we get to spend eternity with you. We love you, Jesus. It's in your name we pray. Amen.